Great. So thanks everybody for taking some time out of your Friday afternoon to join us. Today is going to be the first of two workshops where we're hosting some folks from downtown Crenshaw to speak with us about the report that they wrote. And let me start sharing the screen here. This is the result of course, as many collaborations are, community and planning school collaborations work over many years. And some of the folks who helped write the report and have been on the ground organizing for quite a long time will be able to share some of that background with us today. So really for the, we have 90 minutes blocked out for this afternoon. If we don't use it all, great. And that will be just fine. And folks are welcome to stay and chat as long as they like. We'll hold the space here until 3:30 Eastern. So our agenda for today is pretty clear. I think the folks who are going to present on their work will talk about the context for their work and what led to it, from the on-the-ground organizing to the work in partnership with UCLA to draft the report, and then we'll talk about the findings and their research that led to the report being released over the summer. We'll hear from community leaders, including Ms. Kim, right now on the ground, attending to problems as they arise at the moment. And report authors themselves. There will be a second one on Thursday, December 8th, where we'll hear about the worker cooperative component of the report. So today we're going to focus on housing and community land trusts. And both report backs will be recorded and shared out. So I guess I just wanted to do like for 5 minutes or so before we get started and introduce the panelists who are sharing out today from Los Angeles. Just a little bit of some context is like why we wanted to sort of broaden the audience for these. In the Bronx, of course, we're interested in across New York City and folks who are doing community controlled housing and land work, but there are also a number of projects happening right now across the country of folks doing community-led planning, and we're particularly grounded in an analysis of shared ownership, community control, economic democracy, solidarity economies. And so we wanted to just sort of lift up that across the country, people in California, Chicago, Hawaii, our work in the Bronx, we're not all doing exactly the same work, but we're doing it from the same place with similar visions and analysis of building ecosystems for shared ownership and control at scale. In other words, beyond the single firm or beyond the single neighborhood. And so if there are others, besides the list that I've named here, obviously these are just throwing out a few examples. Please feel free to shout them out, right? This isn't about, excluding or saying only these matter, but there are plenty of examples of this to go around. So, and then, just thinking to ground us in some of this thinking of where at BCDI, we think about infrastructure and ecosystems, and this is part of a national group of organizations that are thinking and doing these things this way. Most people often use the example of Mondragon as the cooperative example, right? Cooperation at scale, economic democracy at scale, tens of thousands of worker owners. Emilia Romagna in Italy, another example of this kind of cooperation at scale grounded in manufacturing and flexible production, with significant additional sort of social, political, economic infrastructures. And what we're witnessing in the United States across the country are numerous efforts to try and build things that are modeled, not identical, but are crafted in similar fashion to build this kind of economic and political power together. Another example that's a little bit less known is the Saikatsu example of a regional food supply chain, a cooperative food supply chain in Japan, which also founded in social movement, has grown to be several 100,000 members. It's a little bit of a joke, kind of an inside joke a little bit for New York City folks, but think of it as a combination of a Costco and a Park Slope food co-op together, right? You sort of have like a environmental justice and scale of purchasing and an urban-rural connection. They've been in existence for many decades, developing connections between rural and urban politically and economically, as well as additional infrastructure to support community-led development. And closer to us in Montreal, another example of cross-sectoral cooperation for economic development is the Chantier in the Montreal and Quebec region of Canada. These are just examples, not to get into too many details, right, but examples of multi-sectoral groups of people building economic and political power grounded in principles and values of democratic economy, community control. And in the United States right now, our efforts are sort of building towards and using these as kind of references. How do we build this kind of economic and political power together at scale over time in ways that are sustainable? There's a great book by Professor Michael Menzer, who is one of the co-founders of the Participatory Budgeting Project, who looked at some of these examples and said, look, when you see these things over time, they have some things in common. When we look at the things that keep them successful, that keep them politically grounded, economically viable, economically flexible and adaptable and resilient, these are the kinds of core infrastructures that we start to see emerge and sustain these efforts over time. So of course, obviously, you got to have the money. That's what James Brown is singing about. A university or research center or something that helps adapt learning and sustain innovation and both economic development learning, but also human, like leadership development learning over time. Some kind of coordinating action, right? The economy, politics, all very challenging, complex, multiple actors, multiple tables, competing agendas. So some kind of coordinating entity to help steward and support these things over time. And of course, and I think what we'll be hearing a lot about today and on December 8th is how all of these things have to be rooted in a strong social movement or a strong cultural movement that is multi-issue and intersectional. And that is a core infrastructure that is often ignored when you only look at these efforts from an economic perspective, but that organizing and social movements are essential infrastructure, essential for sustaining these efforts over time. And I just thought it was just worthwhile to show what some of these things get imaged out to, not to spend too much time on them, but they're starting to become a sort of visual language for communicating these ecosystems and infrastructures in the United States. And so I just wanted to share a couple of images that people are using. This is BCDI, our organization, over the last several years, through community leadership, have developed what we call our hexagon, right? Our community enterprise network of infrastructure that builds out a series of political and economic capacities that are needed in our Bronx work to advance economic democracy, political and economic power. In Chicago, there's an emerging ecosystem. Oh, is that somebody's. In Chicago, there's an emerging one, and we'll hopefully have a chance to hear more from folks who are doing this work in Chicago, an emerging community wealth building ecosystem, where you also start to see sort of joint capacities, education, assets, fundraising, financing, business development, coordination, research, right? So again, thinking complexly, with complexity about all the different things it takes to sustain these things over time. And then what we'll hear a little bit more about today, the Liberty ecosystem, which is what's on the ground happening in Los Angeles, and thinking about how all of these different projects come together to sustain and build community power, economic and political power over time together. And I just thought it would be worth sharing too for folks who haven't seen this. A few years ago, the Climate Justice Alliance came out with their own hexagon version of things, right? Their sort of approach to thinking about how do you build and sustain power, economic and political power for climate justice and a just transition. And a lot of these capacities are very similar, right? So we may be using slightly different language, different framings, but a lot of work in common across the country that unites us. And really excited with that, basically, to do just a quick plug today to say, if you've got a minute, for those who are going to be watching the recording afterwards, or for those who are on right now, to consider scanning your QR code right there and supporting Downtown Crenshaw's work. And we'll come back to the slide after they give their presentation. But I'm gonna take a sec now and hand it over. I'll put this up at the end again for folks if they want it, and I'll drop it in the chat. But maybe I can hand it over to Jeff if you want to start off and introduce folks from your team, and I'll if you can't share, I'll let you share your screen when you're ready.
Oh, hey everybody, I'm Jeff Gussoff. I've been working with the collaboration between UCLA and Downtown Crenshaw. I don't have much to say today because I'll be presenting on next week at the Worker Cooperative event. So I'm just going to turn it over to Jessica, who is one of the master's students in urban planning and is now, I believe, director of policy at a community land trust here in LA. Trust South LA. And so she can kind of give more of an introduction in her background, but was a really key member of the collaboration between UCLA and downtown Crenshaw. She could tell you more about kind of the housing piece of that. And then we're also joined by Professor Chris Tilley, who was our coordinator for the course, the chair of the urban planning department at UCLA. So we're here today. And then Miss Kim, as some of you may have heard earlier on, Kim Jurgen here is one of our great community members with a lot of real estate expertise and has been part of the organizing downtown Crenshaw for a long time now. She will try to join us back. She's dealing with an emergency right now, addressing some of the property issues that downtown Crenshaw manages, but she's also joining us for the call today. So maybe I can just hand it over to Jessica now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, everyone, also for inviting us to share space today and share knowledge around some of our findings with the Downtown Crenshaw Rising Collaborative, specifically around like the housing team. And happy to see Professor Tilley and Jeff here as well. I would love if Kim could talk a little bit about the ecosystem or the Liberty ecosystem, but I know she has an emergency, but we can maybe discuss that afterwards. Can I share screen? I think, hold on 1 second. Can folks see that?
Yes.
Excuse all the tabs.
Okay. Right. Yep, we can see it.
Awesome. So I was part of the housing team, and so this is just a quote from one of our community members who saw that just within the Crenshaw area, specific housing specifically was being eliminated intentionally for like Black community residents, right? And so we've been seeing this ongoing process for years now, and it's just kind of reached its boiling point. And so Downtown Crenshaw Rising, the ecosystem, really worked with or partnered with UCLA on this effort to just figure out some strategies to, one, preserve affordability and also think through different funding mechanisms that can be possibly used in this process as well. So today I'll mainly, so the three components that we focused on for the housing team was mainly around affordability preservation, also like community shareholding programs along with community resources. But today I'm going to go more into the affordability preservation programs and the community shareholding pieces, right? I'm not going to spend too much time on the community resources because those are just kind of tools for Liberty Community Land Trust. But for the affordability preservation program, these were the three different programs that we looked into. The first was Community Land Trust, as Liberty Community Land Trust is a community land trust. The second one was the Small Sites Preservation Program, which helps fund which was essentially like a funding mechanism for that we looked at that was in the city of San Francisco. And then we also looked at backyard home programs to also think through what other strategies we could use to preserve affordability within the Crenshaw area. And so first and foremost, what are community land trusts? Essentially what community land trusts are, we're a nonprofit. We're essentially stewards of the land. We don't necessarily like to say that we own the land because this is at the end of the day native land. So we cannot own that, but we are stewards of that land. And we work to make sure or to ensure that the properties that we're acquiring remain affordable, affordable for at least 99 years, which is the ground lease usually. And we maintain housing affordability through that permanently through this long-term renewable leases on the land. We also work towards at some point having the residents or tenants of those properties become homeowners or shareholders of those properties as well. And so the ownership model essentially results in long-term affordable housing, lower housing costs for community members that are at risk of being displaced or evicted, and then also an opportunity to build equity through home ownership, right? And we explore some of those models through this work too. And some of our findings that my colleagues, so we all split up our work, but these are some of the findings that we had. We looked at several other community land trusts in and around California, but also looking out towards Atlanta and other spaces. We found that community land trusts continue to work to challenge the capitalistic structure of property ownership. However, CLT model, although not new, is slowly but surely gaining support and traction as a viable model for preservation of affordability, community ownership and wealth building, especially in the area of LA, where like that wasn't necessarily like in existence before. There's some community land trusts that have existed for about 17 years now, but slowly and surely we're seeing at the city and the county level, there's just more support for some of these strategies as alternatives to affordable housing sustainability, right? There's also a growing need for capital investment and resources to build capacity within the community land trust landscape. And however, there's not enough funding allocated to support new and existing community land trusts. And so we kind of talk a little bit more into, or we kind of get deeper into it as we go through the presentation. But this is one of the key findings, right? Is that oftentimes there's just not that financial support to build capacity and even support some of these preservation strategies. So we recommended one, like a campaign, right? To spread awareness of the CLTs and their successes, and then also developing publicly available and comprehensive CLT guides that can support with like funding sources and how to like essentially guide how to establish new community land trusts, which I can viably say that the LA Community Land Trust Network is working on that proactively. We're a network of about 5 different community land trusts in the city of Los Angeles. We've developed reports, and we've also established relationships with both the public sector and the private sector to kind of build momentum around the successes that we've had in acquiring buildings, rehabbing them, and getting tenants into that, well, preserving tenants and neighborhoods through that process. And then for our small sites preservation program, we looked at San Francisco City. It was essentially, this program was used as an acquisition and rehabilitation loan program. And it mainly focused on small multifamily rentals that were at risk of being, on the speculative market, and also at risk of increasing rents, right? And so we looked at this program because it was one of the largest subsidy or public subsidy programs that supported some of the strategies around the community land trust model and affordability in the city of San Francisco. And so they mainly looked at 3 building types: buildings of 10 to 12 units, buildings of 3 to 9 units, and also group or single room occupancy units. And this is the cost per unit that they supported in allocating funds for, right? To make sure that they were, just funding those types of buildings and those types of strategies. And then we also looked at, hold on one second. And so these are some of the recommendations that came out of this program. The Community Land Trust and NLA should advocate for subsidies programs in partnership with community orgs to combat displacement and increase affordable housing units. We saw this as a huge opportunity and one that San Francisco was already essentially an expert in. And the unique thing about the small sites program, it was only a temporary program, but they somehow managed to have it become like a permanent program within the city by also issuing a transfer tax that would help bring in this revenue and increase like an affordable housing or increase revenue for an affordable housing fund. And so this is by way of this is one of the ways that they help make this this program more permanent in the city, so that folks can use this and use some of the funding to continue with these strategies. The second recommendation was having Crenshaw advocate and support the House LA ballot initiative, which they did. They ended up endorsing and supporting throughout, I want to say September to November, and we actually passed that bill, and I can get deeper into that if folks have any questions. And also supporting the Foreclosure Intervention Housing and Preservation Program, otherwise known as FIP, in initiatives like that. And so what both of these initiatives do is that they support, they generate funds to support affordable housing strategies. And that's mainly with the United to House LA initiative. It would create a fund of about $900 million or $900 billion to support with affordable housing strategies. And of that $900 billion, about 80 million would go into supporting acquisition and rehab of properties through means of like acquiring motels or hotels, or even through the CLT model. And then the FIP program is another bill that was passed, and it would give qualifying nonprofits the opportunity to essentially bid for homes that were foreclosed. And this was really big, especially because in 2008, we know that a lot of housing was being foreclosed on, and unfortunately, a lot of our community, specifically in South LA, was deeply impacted by this. And so this would give us another opportunity to become first bidders on some of these properties and maintain them in the community and maintain them affordable. The third recommendation was having downtown Crenshaw Rising and the Liberty ecosystem developer advocate for an index measure that would allow for public subsidies to be equitably dispersed among communities with a higher risk of being of displacement, right? So looking at where those public subsidies were going, were they going to more towards like wealthier, more affluent neighborhoods, or were they being specifically targeted to neighborhoods that were deeply impacted by racist land use policies, housing discrimination, just inequities, right? And so we advocated for, or we recommended having this tool as we like get ready to see more funding and public funding into these different affordability strategies. And then we also looked at backyard home programs. We looked at 4 different case studies. The first was LA Mass, the backyard home programs project. And so what this project does, essentially this was a model for organizations and developers seeking to increase affordable housing in their community and provide wealth building opportunities for people of color, also low to moderate income families. The second program was Oakland's Keys to Equity program, and this focused on specifically Black owners, Black homeowners, or people that were deeply impacted by inequities around housing, having them become like, developing opportunities for them to also participate in housing opportunity or wealth building opportunities. The third was also Pasadena's second ADU program. And so that one aimed at increasing affordable housing in the city of Pasadena by providing homeowners with like different housing options or loans to build ADUs. And then the fourth one was the Durham Community Land Trust CLT+1 program, which enabled certain community land trust or the community land trust to develop more ADUs on top of the properties or the land that they had already developed, as a way to also continue wealth building opportunities within those property and neighborhoods. And so these were some of our findings. We found that the backyard home programs actually augment the trade-off between preservation and affordable housing and creating opportunities to build generational wealth. The second finding was that homeowners want to make a profit to offset that new debt that is acquired once they do build the ADU. Our third finding was that LA Mass's backyard home programs, through its partnerships and infrastructure, developed or streamlined the process of permitting, constructing, designing, and planning ADUs. And then finding number 4 was around appraisals. We found that appraisals and construction costs continue to be a challenge for backyard home programs. A lot of times, backyard home programs are not appraised at the rate in which folks would want to see, right? It might cost the homeowner upwards of $200,000, $300,000 to build an ADU. But at the end of the day, it may be appraised for a lot less than it actually costs to build it, right? And then the fifth finding is that there's a need for a construction expert to take on the burden off of the homeowner. So we found that a lot of times, many of the homeowners, it was just difficult to manage an ADU, manage, being a landlord, and on top of that, being a construction expert to kind of design and facilitate the process of design for their ADU project. And so some of the recommendations that we came up with was that the Liberty Community Land Trust should conduct a network analysis to help them build out an infrastructure and a set of partnerships that would allow them to create a pilot backyard home program, which I know Liberty Community Land Trust is already kind of working on. The second was that the Liberty Community Land Trust should continue exploring models that allow them to acquire and rehab existing single-family homes or multifamily homes and utilize their modular construction to add new housing like ADUs. Like I mentioned, they're kind of already exploring that piece. And the third one was to advocate for funding and changes to appraisal barriers This became a consistent issue throughout some of the programs that we looked into, and continues to be a problem. Hold on 1 second. Okay, and then we also looked at community shareholding models. And so this was my colleague. She really supported this piece around, hold on 1 second, I'm getting different calls. So for the community shareholding program, we looked at different shareholding and property acquisition programs. We found that the community shareholding models have gained sustainable momentum. Mission-driven REITs, real estate investment trusts, and community impact funds, community-owned real estate and permanent real estate properties are some key examples, which are some of the examples that we actually looked into, like the Community Investment Trust, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, Housing Partnerships, Equity Trust, and the Inclusive Action for the City Core Program. So these are some of the community shareholding models that we looked at. And then these were some of our findings. So non-mission driven real estate investment trusts actually contribute to the affordability crisis. However, mission-driven REITs can also combat displacement and are sometimes pathways for individual wealth building. We also found that community shareholding models range from national to neighborhood. Community shareholding models have also taken off, are also founded on partnerships where trusts have been fostered, and community shareholding does not have to be a risky investment, and low-income communities can partake in investments safely through the means of a letter of credit from a financial agency such as a bank as well. And then these are just a few of our recommendations that community shareholding models are worth exploring, alongside CLTs, as they offer access to broader investment and broader investment base and a modest wealth building opportunity. They also prioritize local community shareholding models. They enable groups to prioritize communities, as it allows for organizations to more closely engage with people they seek to serve. And starting a community shareholding model often requires trust building and partnerships with various organizations and stakeholders. It's vital to develop trust within the ecosystem that they work together and involve an established lender and organization with prior experience and knowledge. And so these are some of the main findings that we had and the work that we did with the housing team. But yeah, I think that ends, or that's most of the findings that we had. And I'll open it up to Professor Tilley or folks that have any questions.
Great. Let me come back on for a second. Thanks, Jessica. And also, we can keep in mind that if Ms. Kim becomes available, we can bring her into the conversation whenever suits her schedule. Folks want to take a minute to ask any questions that came up from that about the report findings, recommendations. Jessica, I hope you don't mind if I open it up to asking you about your work with Trust LA also.
That works. I have plenty to talk about in these last 6 months.
If there isn't one yet, maybe I could just start, Chris, if you wanted to. I was going to actually ask a background question, but Chris, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say a background thing, which is, well, first of all, I mean, Jeff in the chat said a little bit about how the community collaborative works, but let me just fill in a little of that. And then I gave a link to the Liberty Community, the Liberty Ecosystem website, but I was just going to share that screen in a second. But just to back up and say that the context in which Jessica and Jeff and Ms. Kim Jurgen were all involved was at UCLA we have a quarter system, so it's 2 quarters. It's from basically from January to June. It involved 10 students and a varying number of community members. There was a total of 18 who took part, but I would say a dozen in most weeks were sort of steady participants, all from the Crenshaw community, basically starting with a mandate to explore certain areas and then together trying to conduct research to come up with a plan. And I'm going to actually throw the link. Whoops, no, that's the wrong link. I'll get there. Anyway, I will throw it in when I'm done talking. What I'm going to do in the meantime is say, well, who are we working with in the community? Who would Miss Kim be talking about if she had a minute to spend with us and had resolved her housing emergency? Let me just flash up this screen and say there's a set of mutually supporting organizations in the Crenshaw community, which is a neighborhood of South Central Los Angeles that's a historically Black area. Still, Crenshaw itself is still, if you will, the highest concentration of Black residents in Los Angeles. We were working directly with downtown Crenshaw Rising, but folks were also involved from the Liberty Community Land Trust. So downtown Crenshaw Rising is an advocacy organization, but also led an effort to establish community ownership of the Crenshaw Mall, which was described by people who are active in it as 40 acres in a mall. It's a historical mall that was basically in bankruptcy. The community put together the highest bid for it, and it got sold to a for-profit developer for a lower price because the bank that controlled it decided they just did not want to hand it over to the community. But in any case, there's a couple of important investment funds, one of which is the place where the funds to acquire the mall sit. There's the Crenshaw Subway Coalition. A new subway line has been built through the Crenshaw area, and there was a set of concerns about how that would impact the community and ways to mitigate the impact. And finally, the Umoja Center is a physical space where all these groups are able to meet, and that is a convening place in the community. So I just wanted to share that. You can see down below our goals: neighborhood stability, solidarity economy, local and international unity, environmental sustainability, which was an important part of the report that probably Jessica or Jeff could speak to as well, community-friendly capital, and liberation advocacy. So both very concrete and pragmatic goals, but also very systemic goals at the same time. So let me just leave it at that. And what the link I did drop in is, again, the link to this this particular website. I'm going to shut up and try to get that link together to the report, so that you can, if you want to dig into it a little more beyond what Jessica was able to talk about, you can look at that too. But I'm going to shut up now and let people pose questions.
Great, thanks, Chris, for that background. You folks want to ask either about the background, Liberty ecosystem, community land trust reports, findings? The floor is open.
Hi, everyone. This is Kim. I know I'm in an emergency situation. However, if they have questions, Jessica covered it very well, and so did Professor Tilley. However, I could maybe answer some questions on the types of properties that we have acquired and that we're in the midst of rehabbing of that nature, or anything I might can be able to get on. Is what I'm trying to say. I really apologize for my absence in a sense here, because this is an emergency situation at one of the acquisitions that we have that has tenants in it. And usually it doesn't rain in Los Angeles, but it rained, and so we have a problem. So this is the emergency. So I'm here, I'm listening. So if you have a question for me, just ask. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kim. While we have you, though, would you mind just briefly describing I want to hear your whole backstory and how you got involved in building the Liberty Community Land Trust, but if you only have a few minutes, would you mind just telling us about the properties that you've acquired recently and in the last couple of years and how that fits into where you see it going in the future?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jeff. Okay, I've been in this Crenshaw district for, actually now it's been 40 years living in the Crenshaw district. And basically I lived in 3 of the communities here, View Park, Leimert Park, and now I'm in Angeles Mesa, and they're all in the same locale as Hyde Park, what we kind of concentrated on when we were in the collab. So because of this speculative activity that's going on, especially in our neighborhood, they're trying to erase us from our community after more than 60 years ago with white flight. They flew out because they didn't want to be associated or live with Black folks. But when Blacks started moving west from east in Los Angeles, and mainly concentrated in the Crenshaw district, and basically it is the Crenshaw district because we're the highest concentration of Blacks in the Los Angeles area. So because of the speculation, the gentrification, the displacement, and the high cost of housing, not that it's just in the Crenshaw area, but it's all of the state of California. But because it's prevalent also in the Crenshaw district, is why we concentrate in that area in our acquisitions as a community land trust. And we chose to utilize the affordable housing model of a community land trust because it doesn't put a burden, let's say, on the low income occupant that may be at the property at some point, because it's a split situation in terms of the land and the improvement. We will own the land, and that in itself, when we acquire property, and that in itself lowers the cost of the improvement, be it a tenant or a homeowner, which is our goal for a number of the properties that we own. So that's why we chose to use the community land trust model, affordable housing model, because it doesn't really put a burden on the occupant, the future occupant, because they don't have to contribute to like a fund or anything. Is we acquire the property, we rehab the property, and it could either be rented or sold. So that's why we really chose this model. And since 2019, we've been incorporated since 2019, December of 2019. So this is our about 3rd year. And in that time, we have acquired 8 properties. 2 of the properties were multifamily units through the county pilot program for the CLTS, which was a coalition of 5 CLTs. And the pilot program was a $14 million pilot program initiated and funded by the county. We've utilized, all 5 of us have utilized the funds, and all 5 of us in some stage of rehab at this time. We have acquired 2 multifamily units through the program, one in the Hyde Park area and one in an area of Harbor Gateway. And we have, as Liberty, we have acquired 6 other properties, 3 single families in the Crenshaw Leimert Park area, and 1 in Manchester Square, which is just a little south of the Leimert Park area. and we've acquired 3 commercial properties in the Crenshaw Leimert Park area. And in terms of the Crenshaw properties that we've acquired a vacant one that's pretty much similar to, or maybe utilized as a warehouse. Don't know at this time. We've acquired a legacy vacant land, which was at one point a hotspot in the Crenshaw area. It was called the Total Experience, and that's a vacant land, which we're in the process of drawing and developing it. And then we have a commercial building that has 6 units in it. This is the one building that we do have tenants. Oh, I should say the 3rd building we do have tenants in, because the 2 multifamily properties do have tenants in it. We do not displace tenants. We rehabbing it, and at some point in the future, if they want to purchase the building as for home ownership, all tenants would have to agree that they would purchase the building. So, but these are small multifamilies. There's 4 tenants in one and 5 in the other. And the commercial property that we have that has legacy businesses in businesses that are thriving and surviving, and they even survived through the pandemic, is actually where I'm at now, is where I'm having this emergency problem, because it never rains in Los Angeles, but just my luck, it rained today. And so we have now a water flooding problem here at the property. And that's why I'm just kind of listening here. But that's where we're at this time. When I say we, I really mean Liberty Community Land Trust. I'll give it back to you, Jeff.
Great, thank you, Ms. Kim. And oh, I gotta see a hand up from Sandra. Great.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sandra, Executive Director at Northwest Bronx Community Clergy Coalition. We do organizing around racial justice and economic democracy. I have so many questions, so I'm going to limit it to 2. Thank you for the presentation. Just really inspiring and really exciting. And it's nice to know we have movement partners on the West Coast. So I'm going to start with Ms. Kim, because I know you have very limited time. I am curious, you talked about homeownership around the CLT. We have a lot of low-income homeowners in the Bronx that really face foreclosure. They're getting eaten up by big developers who are giving them cash to leave, but then they have no place to go. Something that we struggle with is how to engage homeowners to understand that partnering with the CLT is not taking away value, but actually providing resources and protection. And I'm curious how you've engaged homeowners to have them kind of understand that. And then I have a second question.
Yeah, that's part of the process of the Community Land Trust. At this time, since our partnership for the pilot program was with what's called a CDC, which is a Community Development Corporation. We acquired the property through them. This was our initial acquisition. So we partnered with a Community Development Corporation that has been developing in the community for close to 20 years. And so they had the expertise in terms of the rehab, the construction, the future ownership, the education of the tenants there. And that's basically what has to happen. There has to be an educational process so that the tenants that are there that want to engage in that, in the ownership part of it, They really have to know, you really have to let them know what it's all about and how it will really help them in keeping their housing costs affordable. So it's really an educational process that you're gonna have to go through. And it's not like it's overnight, because most tenants are used to, when a property is acquired, they have the one mindset that, oh, it's a new owner. Oh, and now we're gonna either be put out, they're gonna raise our rent, or da 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 da. But under the CLT model, that's not the case. We don't displace, we don't raise the rents, and we do rehab, and they don't even have to rehab. So, but they do have to have the educational part of it, because besides the ownership, when they do, or if they do want to become owners, then they have to be educated on how to take care of the unit that they're purchasing. Now they're like homeowners. The only difference is their ownership is the improvement, and the CLT owns the land, which is what keeps the housing affordable. I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much. And we incorporated a CLT in January of 2020, not knowing the pandemic was coming. And so we haven't even begun to engage around homeownership because, we're kind of learning what that process is. So I appreciate your response. The second question I have, I guess, is for the team as a whole. I know a little bit about the 40 acres in a mall. Best slogan ever. It's like incredible. I love that. And that initiative was so powerful and incredible to hear. Unfortunately, y'all didn't get what you wanted, but I'm really impressed on how you brought all these different stakeholders together. And I'm really curious how you went from organizing around the mall to this vast initiative that has like greater goals, greater, it's like beyond one project, right? And I'm curious how you did that.
Is that for me? This is Kim.
Anyone here who wants to answer that question?
In terms of the mall, no, we didn't get it. But we fought hard, and we're still fighting to acquire the mall. And it was not for an individual like developer who got it. It was for the community, so the community could build wealth from the ownership, the collective ownership of the mall. But what I can say, our ability to acquire the number of properties that we have acquired in such a short time is because we were able to convert or be allowed to convert some of the monies that was donated by social justice philanthropics. It was money. If we had got the mall, we wouldn't even have to pay back. They didn't even want a rate of return, nothing. So we put the CLT model to the social justice developers and asked if we could utilize some of the money that was devoted or put to the mall in the manner of affordable housing in the community. And this is one of the major reasons why we were able to acquire so many properties in the short 3 years terms that we've acquired. Now it's we got one, we have a house we're working on now, an acquisition, but we have 8 properties altogether, including the commercials. So this is how we were able to acquire, because we were allowed to, I guess for lack of another word, is transfer some of the money that was donated for the purchase of the mall into the actual affordable housing acquisition, acquiring affordable housing in the area of where the mall is, and that's why I had mentioned like Lamert Park and Crenshaw. The mall is in the Crenshaw area. So that's how we as Liberty were able to acquire what we do, because we're actually in competition with the speculators and the investors. And basically they, they'll go to a homeowner or a seller and say, hey, we can close this in 7 days, give you all cash. No, you don't have to do anything as da 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 da. And the majority of the affordable housing organizations can't compete in that manner because they have to first vie for funds to do it. And that takes time because we didn't have to vie for funds. We had the funds at hand. We were able to compete with the speculators and the developers out there. And that's how we were able to acquire, because we can go to the seller and we could say the same thing. We could close in 7 days, it's as is, and it's all cash. And that's how we've purchased actually all of our properties.
Amazing. Thank you, Ms. Kim.
Thanks, Sandra, for those questions. Anyone else want to either raise their hand or just step to the mic with a question for any of our participants? Don't be shy.
Can I just jump in and introduce Yves Fouché, who's another one of the community participants who really stuck with the project all through. Yves, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself and anything you want to add to what Ms. Kim was just saying?
Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm off camera because I didn't think I was going to participate today. I know I'll be on next week. But yeah, I'm from the area, just a little north of it. I've been in the area for 4 generations and, just looking to UCLA and downtown Crenshaw to see how it is that we can combat gentrification and, the worker co-op model, as well as the community land trust seem to be, something that was promising. So that's why I got involved. I've been in the restaurant business, family restaurant business with my mother for about 15 years, but it's been around since the late 70s. And, like many other Black restaurants, we just, never could scale our business. We started it ourselves. So we just could never qualify for capital. And a lot of the capital they say that is available for small businesses or small Black businesses seems to be a bit of a rat race, or not a rat race, just kind of like running in circles. And a lot of the programs that they say that are out there, oftentimes, people don't hear about people that never get funding. And so, a lot of our historical restaurants are just underfunded. And, I've gone to talk to them about their experience. And a lot of us just, we can't compete with the Chipotle's or the In-N-Outs because of, not being able to offer healthcare or offer a pathway to, better paying jobs. So, some of the issues we've had is around scalability and qualifying for funds. And so, learning about the co-op, the worker co-op model, Arizmendi, the Mondragon, for me is why I got involved, just because I was just like feeling apathetic, and it just seemed like, gentrification was encroaching upon us. So, I'm new to the co-op world, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can. But that's some of the reasons why I got involved, a little bit of my history, and, me looking forward to figuring out how to solve some of these issues.
Great. Thanks, Yves. Yeah, we're definitely going to look forward to hearing more from you at the next one. I'm excited for that. Any other questions on the CLT side or for any of the other folks? Oh, there's a hand. Oh, Niru. Okay, great. Yeah, Niru, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. I'm Niru. I'm the research manager at BCDI. This presentation was really great, and the report is something that we've gone to many times this year, especially because we are trying to bring in a lot of the components of the Liberty ecosystem here in the Bronx, the impact fund, the acquisition fund. So I was just curious to know a bit more about the strategy that was used to develop these different components of the ecosystem. Was there any specific rationale around like the timelines, what was established first versus what came later on? And I was also curious about the acquisition tool that was included in the report. If you could elaborate a bit more about the ecosystem and then the tool, that would be really helpful.
Great. Thanks, Niru.
Ms. Kim, I think that's for you. You're here representing the Liberty ecosystem.
Maybe if Miss Kim becomes available, we can switch over to her. If so, maybe from the report side, if you want to just give a little bit, maybe a background or context on the tool that Niru is talking about. I mean, if you've read the report, it's described in there, but to talk a little bit about that that tool.
Yeah, so the tool, my colleague was super excited about this piece. Brian, I do want to give credit where it's due. Brian Ramirez, from our UCLA alumni, who's now in Seattle working for an affordable housing developer. He was really instrumental in creating this tool, the chat tool. And so the premise for that is that we really wanted to make sure that community was included in the process of identifying properties that can be acquired. And so that's how essentially the tool came about. We also modeled it after, there's an organization in South LA called Sage. They have an Own It tool where they're able to identify different properties, who owns those properties that are up for sale and things of that sort. And so we modeled it after that, but our purpose was to engage community residents in this process, right? Having them also identify which properties might be going onto the speculative market or already are. If there's any rumblings from homeowners or property owners that are looking to sell, making sure that we acquire a list of those properties and ensure that we have a premise to kind of begin conversations with those property owners and seeing if we can acquire those thereafter. I know that was one of the biggest things that came out of the housing portion. And so it was mainly looking for properties of interest. And my colleague did a really good job of doing this. We were hoping to have an interactive map, such as the Own It tool had, but we were just constricted with time. But I think that one of the key components to this is also training and engaging community as to giving them the agency to identify which properties might go up for sale, but also educating them around that the fact that they also have power to kind of partake in this process, right? To essentially, make sure that their neighborhoods were being preserved and that they were no longer seeing, displacement of their neighbors, right? Or of the residents in the community. We're kind of working on something at a policy level in relation to that. Not necessarily the tool, it's great to have the tool, and that's something that we're seeking to develop further through Sage's Own It tool. I'm not sure where Liberty is at with adopting the chat tool, I know that at the city level, or more so at the county level, we were looking to also pass a policy around TOPA, right? The Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, so that residents in their own community can also have the first right of refusal when a property is put on the speculative market for sale. And some of our properties within community, now that I work at a community land trust, I'm a little bit more aware of like how we've acquired some of the buildings that we have. I know that for Trust South LA in particular, we acquired one of our last properties because a homeowner was looking to not displace their tenants, that those tenants had been in that property for 25 plus years. And so they were trying to figure out a way as to how to house those folks and not have them displaced. And one thing led to another, and they actually connected with Trust South LA because they saw this as a strategy to ensure that their tenants were not displaced and ensure that they continue to be there. And so now we're working with those tenants to again, educate them around the CLT model, but also get them on board with like getting neighbors and residents aware of like this as a viable strategy for preserving neighborhoods within the LA area. But the chat tool was really cool. I think we were really excited about it. We're just trying, I think the biggest issues that we faced around it was like funding for such a tool and capacity for such a tool. So we found that Sage's Own It tool was a great foundation. And so we would have wanted to develop it a little bit further to include this piece, but again, just time constraints were an issue, but thank you for uplifting that piece. I missed it in the presentation, but that was definitely part of a key component for the housing team.
Thanks a lot for that.
Oh, great. Yeah. And thank you, Chris, for adding more about the tool in the chat for folks who are curious to go check it out in there or check out the organization and the Own It tool. Oh, and another report from the Right to City Alliance. Great. Any other questions for our panelists? I know I said at the beginning we're very flexible around time. So if folks are good, we can end. We don't have to go all the way until until half past the hour, but want to make sure if there are any other questions on anything that we get a chance to talk. Oh, Michael. Yep.
Hey everyone, quick question. Did you all notice anything significant that you would raise about any differences or advantages and disadvantages between the more neighborhood city mission developers, mission-driven developers, and the more like national mission developers? Like, was there anything different of significance that we should be thinking about, just thinking about it strategically?
I think for more local, like mission-driven organizations, it was, I think one thing that I noticed as a pattern was like the disadvantage of like capacity, right? Like capacity to fund, or I think the alignment was there, and I think that was great, but it was always like the capacity or the funding that was of issue. Whereas like on a more national level, like there is that capacity, there is that funding piece. And so at the local level, it's about pushing for more funding mechanisms to support the capacity building, right? And one of the things that I do want to bring up about Liberty, I think it's very unique, and a strength that Liberty possesses is that they don't do things on their own. They work within the Liberty ecosystem. And one thing that we didn't mention in the report that I found out after when I started working at a community land trust myself was that Liberty Community Land Trust actually works within a network of 4 other community land trusts, right? And so they not only work with this network, the Los Angeles Community Land Trust Network, to acquire buildings, but they also work with them to push for policies that'll ensure that they're combating displacement and preserving affordability at all levels, right? And really uplifting the CLT model as a strategy to continue to preserve affordability. Because oftentimes we just see affordable housing as like the end all be all for, especially in LA, right? As the end all be all for for how to address like the housing inequities, but slowly but surely the CLT model is now being seen as like a viable strategy as well. But it's slow, right? And that goes for like more local level organizations or like mission driven organizations as well, is that we're continuing to see more progress, but it's just a little bit more slow. And I think Liberty Community Land Trust also does a really great job working within this coalition to not only push for these policies, acquire these properties, but also work with different other partnerships to essentially promote their work and like look for other funding mechanisms. And so at the national level, I think we actually can derive a little bit more from more nationally driven organizations that have built out the infrastructure and capacity for their CLT model. I think for now, the progress has just been slow at the local level here in LA, if that makes any sense. I hope that that's clear.
Could I just piggyback on what Jessica said? So yeah, I think Jessica, you was very clear about sort of that some of the national players have capacity and scale. But I think you made this more implicit, but the strength that the local, really rooted organizations bring is a level of accountability, a level of direct communication with the communities. And so look, there's a division of labor, there's a place for everybody in this bigger ecosystem. But I think what Jessica was talking about, the kind of alliance building, is really key, because what you really want is an alliance of folks that have deep roots in their communities that can achieve scale by working together. And so the Liberty ecosystem picture has the set of organizations working in the Crenshaw area. But as Jessica said, then Liberty Community Land Trust is connected to four other community land trusts that have worked in an alliance. I would also point out there's a lot of different connections that you don't see when you see the Liberty ecosystem. One of the properties that is being developed in Crenshaw with Liberty Community Land Trust. I live in Venice on the far west side of Los Angeles. Venice Community Housing is actually working with Downtown Crenshaw and Liberty Community Land Trust to sort of do some mentoring on the development, because Venice Community Housing has a longer housing development track record. And I think that kind of local, regional, national, bottom-up alliance building is the only way that we're going to have a sort of a truly both grassroots but also scaled and powerful movement.
Yeah, thanks for that, both of you. Yeah, that is really important. And I think in New York City, we have something called the New York City Community Land Initiative, which is also a collaborative of some of the newer generations of community land trusts. And there's been some mentorship, and as well as opportunities to share resources. And that's critical for these larger, especially at larger cities. Working at the neighborhood level alone is what allows you to get kind of swamped or taken over by predatory equity and other speculators, et cetera. Any other last questions for folks, for other folks? Great. Alexa and, oh yeah, there's two folks there. Great. Hey, and Shamar, great.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I'm Alexa Ross.
And I'm Shamar Pitts.
And we're both from an organization based in Philadelphia called Philly Thrive. And we joined the call late, so we were so sad to miss some of the information the first half hour, but see so many overlaps with the work we're doing, trying to organize around the largest redevelopment in the city of Philadelphia's history, which is a former oil refinery, and our just pursuit to agitate for community ownership over in the redevelopment process is what we're working on, and is such a challenge and a struggle, and also trying to, create solutions to aid in the gentrification and increased displacement of long-term Black communities that as this property is redeveloped from a major polluting source into another land use is going to impact nearby neighborhoods, as they're already being impacted by development forces in Philly that are really ruthless and have no kind of resident accountability. So much connection and just so inspired by y'all. Would love to learn more and hopefully find ways to ally and align, because yeah, we're it's a lot of work. So thank y'all for doing what you're doing. You have anything?
No, that was it. That's good.
Great, yeah, thank you all. I hadn't heard about your work. I'm glad to learn about you all, and thanks for signing up. This whole thing will be recorded, and we'll send out an email to everybody who registered with more background on the work in LA and the full report and all that too. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Any other last comments, questions?
I just wanted to shout out Philly because I'm from the Bronx. We were actually working on one of the biggest armories in the country here in the Bronx, and we're in the middle of a redevelopment process, and we're also trying to convert the land that the armory is sitting on to a community land trust. So I would love to continue to connect with y'all in LA, in California, and Philly, so we can share ideas, share like the process, how that's been, because it's something that's never been done here. That's such a massive project, and it's something that we feel that could be transformative for the whole, not just the Bronx, I mean, not just our neighborhood, but the entire borough of the Bronx. So I'll, glad to hear that Philly and California is doing similar work, because we're gonna need all the support as well. And these learning sessions are important for us to kind of like understand what other folks around the country are doing. And I look forward to taking some of this information back to our members so they can understand like how that work is all over the country. So shout out to y'all, Philly and California. I just wanted to say that real quick.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Juan. That was great. I like that. Ending perhaps on a note of regional, interlocal solidarity, translocal solidarity. Unless there are any other quick comments or questions. Happy to obviously share info. Folks can always email me. My email was the one directly connected to the Zoom invite. I'm be happy to connect folks after if folks want to also drop their email, obviously in the chat before we log off. If there aren't any others, any other questions or comments. Thanks so much to the folks from LA for spending some of your afternoon with us, for folks joining in, and definitely now getting much more hype and excited for the next one too, on worker cooperatives, and to hear from other folks, including Eve. Thanks for joining us today to hang out on the first one, and look forward to connecting with you all next week for part 2 of this series. Thanks everybody for joining.